Hey there, welcome back. This is Needed Conversations with Ryan and Victoria Cole. Thanks for joining us for another episode on communication. We're in the communication series, and this is such an important series because we actually done a poll on Instagram, and that was one of the issues that a lot of people are dealing with. And let's face it, communication is not only relegated to our relationships with our spouse, but it's during our phases of dating, it's with our children, it's interactions with our in-laws. Relationships require us to work on a daily basis. And so we are just trying to give you guys wisdom in how to approach people in general, not just your spouse. So if you're listening, you're not married, you're single, and maybe dealing with some communication issues or things that you may have to address yourself, hopefully you'll be able to identify those issues and either reach out for help or really allow God to heal those places of hurt so that you can approach relationships in a healthy way.
That's right. And we're continuing that conversation on communication by talking today about how to communicate your dreams to your spouse and really to anyone who is going to be a part of your dream team. And of course, your dream team always begins with who is in your immediate family. But before we jump into that conversation today, if you have any questions about dating or marriage, you need help with your marriage, want marriage counseling or coaching, give us a text at 864-428-7131. 864-428-7131. That is a line that that is dedicated for Victoria and I to answer your questions, to help you in the dating process or to grow with God and discover your purpose. So text us, or you can always go to moremostforever.com and find out more about what's going on with us in the marriage ministry and events that we have, including, which is relevant to this topic today, our Marriage with a Mission workshop. We host them periodically in person and online, so go and check it out at moremostforever.com. It's a great workshop for you and your spouse to go through because we believe that a marriage that is built on a mission is destined for success. And so we help redefine what success really means as well, to take us out of the world's view of what that is. And then we give you a workbook to help you with investigative questions, discover what it is God has called you to do, both as individuals, but how that runs parallel with your spouse. So jumping into today's conversation, Victoria, you want to start?
Yeah, Marriage with a Mission has been so vital, and we've heard so many great testimonies about it. And I know most people are like, well, I don't really need to write a mission statement for my marriage. But honestly, this for us has been life-changing because it really helped us to communicate and even communicate deeper on a deeper level than we've actually, started to communicate at the beginning of our marriage. We came as individuals into this marriage writing our vision statements ourselves individually, which I think is so important for those of you who are in the dating process to really truly find out what your purpose is, what your dreams and aspirations are, so that whenever you're actually dating, you're able to communicate with your spouse and see, or with your potential partner, what your goals and aspirations are, and see if those lines kind of are going to run parallel, or at least express yourself before jumping into such a large commitment. But regardless, even if you got married and you're kind of in a rut, you don't really know how to communicate, how to, set goals, and maybe one of your spouse or your spouse is kind of stagnant or feeling like they don't want to dream. They're kind of settled into their life as a spouse or as a dad or as a mom, and they just feel like that they can't dream anymore or don't want to dream. And maybe you're that spouse that wants to dream, and there's that frustration of feeling like you're the only one that's wanting to go somewhere. I mean, one of the things that we've said before, most of the couples that we counsel, always ask a few years down the line in a marriage, where is this thing going? And whenever you don't have a mission or a vision statement for your marriage, it will feel like a rut. It will feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. It's the same mundane tasks, and you feel like you're kind of aimlessly doing them instead of being very strategic. And so we wanted to do this episode because it also will help to communicate both of your dreams and aspirations and how both of you can support one another, even if you are both separately working different jobs and maybe in different careers and paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just because you're married doesn't necessarily mean that both of your dreams have to be exactly the same.
Right.
But they have to run in parallel. You might be in different industries. God might call you to a different group of people, but there has to be some points of commonality, or at least a general understanding of your spouse's dream, even if it's not necessarily your own, so that you can support them and give them guidance and wisdom as their closest confidant in the process. And Victoria is absolutely right. This is a vital conversation that should be had when you're dating. And most people do not have that conversation. And then they end up in a marriage that is moved by societal expectations, right? So most people,
the next thing?
Right. Most people get married because of a societal expectation. They feel like they're getting to a certain age, or there is just this weight, whether it be from culture or their family, parents telling them, why aren't you dating? When are you going to get married? And maybe your family didn't put that pressure on you, and it's good, but definitely it's in all of our culture and media, et cetera, that, you should be pursuing marriage in some way. And I think that you should, with the right mindset. And I think that you should not allow the pressure of time to drive you into a relationship that is not right for you. Even if you feel all of the feels, right? The infatuation, the chemicals and hormones that are released when you're kind of infatuated with a person. Mm-hmm. You should not enter into marriage until you are certain that they are going to be a purpose partner. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is with marriage. Like, let's just say you're married and you don't have a vision. What do you think is going to be next for you? If you feel like your marriage is in a rut, and we hear this a lot, people assume that, maybe children is going to solve this. Maybe,
and it adds even more pressure and more problems.
Exactly. But you think in your mind, it's because we haven't moved on to the next phase yet, right? And then you have children and you realize that your marriage isn't better. In fact, it's worse, because with every seasonal shift in your marriage, that magnifying glass on the relationship gets closer and closer, and who you are comes out, and you're unable to hide behind the veil that you put in front of your face while you were dating. You're seeing yourself exposed, and a lot of times that can lead to you putting defensive mechanisms in place to protect yourself from the insecurities that are revealed in that relationship.
Yeah,
I know I've said a lot, but
no, those are great things. But, we've talked about in previous episodes, and I think that's why it was important for us to go to the basics before we stepped into this, because you really cannot start dreaming with a person if you cannot effectively learn to communicate with them. If you're constantly coming to the table and you're shouting at one another, and there's always contentment, there's never like this common interest that you guys have. There's a lot of issues that you still have to unravel before jumping into this. I know a lot of people look at this and it sounds grand, but I think it's very important to have those foundational points that we've talked about in previous episodes, and you can go back and listen to those, because those are vital for you to be able to express your dreams in the proper way, in the proper context. And again, we've talked about, how does your spouse listen? We may be saying the same thing, but maybe they're viewing it from a different lens, and that's affecting the way you guys are communicating and the way they're receiving your dreams. And maybe then you're feeling like now they're not hearing you, because it's a completely different viewpoint whenever they tell you, you told me this. And so it's very important not to have any assumptions in the marriage. And like Ryan said, don't jump from thing to thing, because that's the next thing to do. And even if this sounds very enticing, marriage with a mission, if you are having problems in the marriage, I highly recommend mediation, which we do in person and in virtually if you would like to. And again, it's just something for you to be able to get help with, so that you both are able to express, your issues, things that you may not be able to address when you are like alone by yourself as a couple. If you are having those struggles, we want to be that mediation because, again, every couple is very unique and very different. So before you jump into even doing this, we would love to help you to resolve those issues so that you are able to create that marriage with a mission, be effective in the way you are talking.
Yeah. One of the worst things that you can feel in a marriage is that that you're not seen, heard, or understood as a person. I think that that's really the heart of intimacy, is being able to see who a person truly is behind all the layers and being able to get to the heart of them and then look at them deeply and love them unconditionally. Every person in a marriage desires that, but sometimes it's hard to get there because we have so many layers that we've built on top to defend ourselves, and that comes through bad relationships, and it comes through our childhood or whatever the case may be, and it even comes from betrayal in the relationship. We're going to talk about that in the weeks to come, how to rebuild trust, and that affects your communication, because if you don't trust someone, you're not going to open up to them. And so even in your relationship, you may be saying to yourself, we've got all of this brokenness to deal with. How could we even begin to think about vision? Well, I think that you're going to have to run those things simultaneously. You're going to have to be seeking help, like Victoria says, and finding healing for your brokenness to be able to trust again, while also just praying and asking God, what do you want to do with our marriage? How do you want to get glory out of this relationship? And that's the beginning questions that you should be asking. Vision is powerful. For you to have a dream about what you want to do with your life is one thing. To be able to communicate that effectively and mobilize people around you to be able to see what you see, how you see it, is another thing. And I think that if you can't start with your family and they don't understand your dream, it's hard for me to imagine how other people in the world are going to be able to understand it. And even if they do, then you might create an alliance outside of your household that is unhealthy that may lead to the end of your marriage. You may not think that now, right? Because you find people, they understand my dream. And you start putting your head in the lap of people who you're not in covenant with yet. And your marriage gives you that covering that you need. So that when you go out and express that dream and vision, that you have a shelter, a covering to come back to at home. And every society progresses because of the engine of vision. And people who are able to engineer what the world could look like and craft an idea, a compelling idea that mobilizes people. And the same thing is with your vision in marriage, right? It's the engine that helps move your relationship forward. If you don't have vision for your future, your marriage is going to grow stagnant. You're going to find yourself unhappy, unfulfilled, and you're going to turn either inwards to your insecurities, or you're going to turn outwards and start blaming your spouse. So if you don't have a vision for your marriage and you're not able to communicate that vision effectively, you're not going to be able to build a really strong foundation to build upon so that the Lord can get glory out of your relationship. I hope that makes sense.
That's great. And, the worst thing you can do is have assumptions in the marriage, especially like, well, they're not listening to my dreams and goals. I have this and they're holding me back, because maybe they're the spouse that's kind of like
more practical,
or maybe they've kind of stopped. A lot of times men tend to be this way too. Like they tend to kind of like conquered it, like Ryan said, went from one thing to another, have fulfilled that task, and maybe they have lost themselves or they don't know what their purpose is. So they're kind of like going with their, day-to-day tasks and not really wanting to do anything else. And then, if they don't give that vision in their family, there's that frustration from the woman saying like, where are we going? What we're doing? We need to be, continuing to grow as a family, as our marriage, and, our children are constantly changing and growing, and our approach has to change. Same thing with marriage. You have to continue to invest in it. You have to continue to have those tough conversations. maybe different transitions that you're going through and how we're going to shift through this in a positive way. And that requires you to be vulnerable and open with your spouse and not leave room for assumption. And like Ryan said, don't open doors because your spouse doesn't hear you. You're going to run to your girlfriend or you're going to run to your guy friends and say, talk bad about your spouse. And the problem is that you haven't even talked to your spouse about it, period, because you're saying that they don't hear you. But the issue with going to the outside people is that they don't know all the intimate issues of your marriage. My mom always said, every marriage is like a dark forest. You just never know what actual things have went down. It takes two to tango. So there's always issues on both sides. It's never this one person's fault. And so it's very important for you guys to keep those things within your family and make sure that you guys are having those open and vulnerable conversations so that you guys can have can make that dream happen, and you can run in parallel lines, even if you guys are both maybe doing two different careers. What is that common thread that you can dream about and can really help your children to understand what you guys doing as a family, and then build that strong foundation. And then listen, you're going to be empowered to do outside tasks even more, because family is very important, and you'll always come back to that, and you'll have that strong foundation to build on.
Yeah, she raised a lot of things there. Number one, vision requires constant communication.
Yes.
But number two, there's two sides, right? You may have expressed a dream or a vision to your spouse, and they may be disheartened by their past or failures before or whatever. And maybe they're in a rut, right? So you feel like that they don't understand you. You have to help your spouse walk through that to a place where they can have vision again as well. But on the other side of that equation, maybe it's your spouse that God has brought into your life who is this protective barrier, a person of reason. One of you is bound to be more creative than the other. One of you is bound to be more of a risk taker than the other. And I think that you need that tug and push and pull with your relationship to keep you in check and in balance. Because for me, I'll move at the drop of a hat. I'll pick up something. I'll move at a whim. But I think Victoria is a stable anchor. She likes, consistency and routine and security. And I like those things as well, but I also love spontaneity. But I think the balance that we have protects us from making decisions out of our emotions, me in particular. And you may be like me, that you're ready to hit the go button as soon as God gives you a vision. But your spouse may be just the one to reason with you and say, okay, I hear you. But let's think about this, and this. Have you thought about this angle? Have you thought about the toll that might take on our family if we rush it, before our kids are of a certain age? Have you thought about the financial implications? Have you thought about the relationships that we have and how that might be severed, and we might be lonely and might not have the support system that we have right now if we go there or do this. And I think that if you are an insecure dreamer, you can hear all of those things as criticisms toward your dream.
Yes.
And it will be easy for you to go outside of your marriage and find someone
that agrees
with you, who does not understand, like Victoria said, all of the trees of the forest of your marriage. Like, it's dark and it's dense, and only your spouse really knows all of the nuances of your life and your relationship. And so you've got to wrestle with that dream with your spouse before you wrestle with it with anybody else. And your spouse is going to be a protective barrier. And God works in sovereign ways. Even if your spouse is not intentionally kind of the wise counsel, even in their reservations or even in a dark season of their life, God could be building capacity in you both for what's to come. And you being patient with the process is going to ensure that when you actually step into the fulfillment of your dream, that it doesn't crush you and it doesn't crush your marriage, because you two have wrestled long enough together to build a strength and a resiliency to be able to handle the weight of where God is taking you.
Yeah, and this has really helped us to communicate not only for ourselves and for our marriage's sake, but really teaching our children, like how are they going to be partakers of our mission as a family, that we are bringing them along the journey, even though they're little. We're learning to incorporate them into what God has called us to do. We're teaching them to pray. Because we are in ministry, there's certain things that we want them to know even in the early age. And you want to set your children up for success. This is it. The point of you talking with your spouse and getting into a place where you both come to an agreement. You may not agree on all things. And some things, like Ryan said, you may have to continue to wrestle with. Actually, did not like that word because I'm not a talker. I'm not much of a talker, although I'm a female. Usually, most of the times they say females are like the talkers in the family. Well, we're completely opposite. Ryan really loves to talk, and I'm more like an introvert, reserved. I can talk, but I'm not much of like, if there's disputes or contention, to sit there and actually talk it out. But it is true, like you really have to wrestle. And that doesn't mean that you have to start shouting at each other. Like we said, that you have to learn how to have ways that you are able to communicate in an effective way. You are going to have disputes, even in the healthiest of marriages. If somebody's telling you they don't have disputes, there's a problem there. Because it's going to require both of us to be vulnerable and continue to express ourselves. And what do we mean by when we say wrestle? A lot of times we'll have a lot of these back and forth, like, so do you mean you said this and this is what you're telling me? And no, that's not what I mean. Well, what do you mean? I mean, it's just this back and forth, and it's truly a wrestling until you kind of simmer down and you say, okay, maybe I'm not understanding my spouse, or maybe they are coming from that background or from that viewpoint, and I'm just receiving it because of the hurt and the pain that I've experienced from my previous relationships and my previous time, as a child or as a teen or whatever in those relationships. So you become like more aware of what your spouse is trying to tell you, and so it doesn't make you wrong or your spouse wrong, but you just come with an understanding. So that's what we say when we mean, like, when we say wrestling, that's what we mean when we're talking about having these conversations. Because
effective communication is not just about saying the same thing, but it's about seeing what you say the same way. And it's not about you changing your perspective per se, but it's about getting into your spouse's perspective to be able to understand what they're saying when they're communicating it to you.
What is that saying about like walking in somebody's shoes, walk a mile in someone else's shoes? Do you remember that saying?
No.
You don't remember that saying? There is a saying where you, like, if you really want to understand somebody, you walk a mile in their shoes. Okay, you really put your shoes on and you start to understand, like, okay, they're coming from this. And I don't think you truly can fully
understand where they sit for a second. Get their vantage point, right?
Don't try to, like, respond because you feel like you're in the right and you have to have the last word. But really just ponder. Allow yourself to think. I think we're afraid to think. I think we're afraid to be alone by ourselves sometimes and alone with our thoughts. So we have to constantly scroll. We have to constantly read something. We have to constantly listen to music or something. But it's good for you to just sit there and listen to what in your mind, like the conversations that you've had, and kind of, chew on the word and then come back together and say, I may not understand your perception, but I mean, I hear you, and this is how you're able to cultivate that intimacy, because your spouse is truly going to feel like you're actually hearing them and you're trying to understand, even if you don't understand at that time. And prayer is such a vital point for you guys to have in your marriage, because that's really going to also help not only heal your soul, but also going to bring you both together and maybe heal the places of your soul that you're struggling with. And maybe that's why you're not seeing your spouse's viewpoint.
Which brings us to a very practical side of this conversation, which is, how do you communicate your vision, your dreams, your goals to your spouse? And she touched on it first. The priority is prayer, right? If you feel like God is giving you a vision, even before you communicate it with anyone, including your spouse, let that thing roll around in your spirit with God for a while. right? And this is good for husbands as well, because sometimes God has to build capacity in your spouse for what he's showing you. Maybe they don't have a framework for it or the kind of experience that you do. And when God gives you a big dream, you've got to start marinating that thing in prayer. Just before you put it on the stove, you got to tenderize it. We make, chicken and stuff like that. And, when we first were cooking and making chicken, we would just, put some salt and pepper on it and throw it in the oven. But I think the more we grow older and we learn cooking skills, we realize, okay, let me marinate this thing. Let me take this mallet and pound it out, and let me just, add a little bit more to the process. And then the end result is not some dry chicken that's digestible, but it's not necessarily good tasting,
right?
But you've added a little bit more to the process, and that patience in the cooking process, and it yielded you a better, more fulfilling, satisfying result. And the same thing is with a dream. If God starts showing you something and it hasn't fully marinated inside of your heart and you don't quite understand it, you could give it to your spouse and they could just completely misunderstand it, or, be confused about what you're saying, or take it personally, or start feeling insecure. But if you let that thing marinate, even for a couple months with God, and then sit down with your spouse, you'd probably be surprised that the Lord was already speaking to them as well. Let's think about it, right? Mary is encountered by an angel, and that angel comes to her and says, you're going to have a child, and you're a virgin. I know that. And it sounds confusing, but it's going to happen supernaturally. And she's like, be it unto me. But then she's like, how am I going to share this to him? He's going to think it's crazy and all of that. But in her patience, allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to her spouse and giving that time.
That's so good.
Joseph had a dream. And you know what? The unique thing about that is an angel came to Mary, but Joseph had a dream. And God speaks to us in different and unique ways. And so we've got to let God speak to our spouse too. And then when they came together, after God had spoke to them individually, there was this mutual understanding. And I'm sure when they had conversations about it, talked about it, there was no judgment. Mary didn't have to feel like, she was carrying something that her spouse didn't understand. And how many people are carrying dreams that they feel like their spouse didn't understand because they tried to talk their spouse into something that they didn't give God space to talk to their spouse about. And so,
Ryan's preaching right now.
Sometimes
you guys are taking notes.
Sometimes communicating with your spouse could mean letting God work that thing in your heart before you communicate it, so you can communicate it more effectively.
And I'm going to take it a step further, because when Mary was already, she was with child, she came to Elizabeth, and both of their children rejoiced in the womb. And that's the thing, is that you want to be surrounded with people that are going to understand your dream as well. Don't go out and just spew, all this information out there and share it with the world, but really, confide in your spouse, like Ryan said. And then you are going to have maybe one or two people that you can trust, maybe a female friend that can pray with you and stand with you and say, I believe with you. I'm going to continue to pray with you and stand with you in agreement for what is God is calling you to do. That's the kind of friends that you truly need, because their spirit and your spirit is just in alignment. You know what I'm saying? You're not sitting there gossiping about your spouse, but there's a dream that God has given you, and you guys are both prayerful and really supporting one another in the way God has made it to be.
Yeah. And, just some practical, even more practical things when you guys have felt an urgency from God to pursue a dream. Like, what is the process that you go through to get that thing from dream to delivery? And there's something that I use in my business, and I've used as an artist, a songwriter, a producer, things that I've done creatively. When I work with people, it's the creative process. It's the 5 Ds. Mm-hmm. You dream, you define, you design, you develop, and you deliver. Dream, define, design, develop, and deliver. And so if you move through this creative process effectively, then you prevent bottlenecking in your life as a dreamer. Because if you're a dreamer, that means that you're probably sort of like a dog that sees a squirrel, like you have this dream, and then all of a sudden you have another dream and another dream. And that's why marriage is important too, because, your spouse may be there to help keep you on task and on focus. And the thing about this creative process is that when you move from one D to the other, you don't go back a step, right? Once you've dreamed with God and you truly sit with that thing for a while and you begin to define it, when you move into that design and develop stage, you don't go back to the dream process. You don't go back to thinking about the what ifs and the possibilities, because that dream phase is very abstract. It's like, the absolute ends of the earth, let's get on a rocket and shoot to the moon kind of experience. And when you define it, you become a little bit more clear about how you're going to execute it and who the intended audience is, who God's called you to, the problems that you're going to be solving. And then when you start designing it, you're really getting your hands in the dirt and throwing mud on the potter's wheel and seeing what you can come up with. And then developing is really chiseling out the fine details before you deliver it into the world. But if you go back to that dream phase, you'll keep throwing mud on that potter's wheel and never actually fulfilling anything. Now, you may get to the delivery phase and it may not have turned out the way that you thought it was, but it was a learning experience that you can build upon to dream again and go through the process again. And if you're in that creative process and you feel as if you got this thing dreaming, it's not that you can't dream while you're in the process. It's that you have to compartmentalize that dream and put it in a different space and start a separate creative process. And then you have to be careful about how you allocate your time and your resources so that you can focus in and actually accomplish something that you put before you. Because there's a lot of dreamers who are in a comatose state, living in a la-la land and never waking up in reality and putting their feet to the ground and putting their dream to work. If you're in that place, you're doing nobody any good. It's one thing to be a dreamer, but you apply faith and put works to that, man, you could change the world. But you've got to have some type of process. I'm not saying to build a monument on that, right? That was just, it didn't even come from me. I found it somewhere one time, but I've used it and it works, and it's not perfect. God will move you. I'm not saying don't listen to God, but I'm saying have some type of plan in place for you to get that dream out of you, right? And of course, that second step is defining it. If you can't define that dream in a specific way, this probably is one of the hardest phases of the process, because you're going to be designing all over the place. You're going to be all over the map if you haven't well defined that dream. And so that's sort of a good process for you to enact in your family, or maybe your business, or when you're talking with your spouse, you're like, okay, we have this dream. Let's write it down. Let's define it. Let's write it in a paragraph form so both of us understand it. Let's memorize it. Let's put it on the mirror, and let's formulate our prayer agenda around this. I hope you're getting this today, because this is really good strategy.
Yeah, and marriage with a mission, that's the thing. It's not just necessarily writing a mission statement and all that. What Ryan said was phenomenal. But you're going to be able to create like this, list of all these goals and things that you want to accomplish. But as the years go by, and we're hoping that you will create it as a lifestyle, you do this yearly, that you continue to come back to it and revise it. What we've learned is, because we started this, with at the start of our marriage, throughout the years, we have learned that God is refining that what God has called us to fulfill. And in the first stages, when we first started doing it, it was kind of vague. We were kind of doing this and this, and we still kind of have certain things that we're fulfilling. But I think as we grow together and we communicate and we create these dreams together, and again, it's that, that one common thing that we're really focused on. And of course, we're including our family and all these other things that come into play, with life and whatever comes with it. But as you go together and continue on this path, God will start removing things that may be good, but are distraction, so that you can really push those roots deep into the ground and that you can strongly build that foundation. So whatever God gives you in the coming years, you're prepared to handle it. And again, like we said, you don't want to spread yourself thin and then you come back home and your foundation is, cracking and you cannot build on anything. So you're looking for outside sources to fill those places of your soul. You need to focus on your foundation so that whatever God has called you to do, whether it's with your spouse or not with your spouse, you're able to handle it well and with integrity and have support that you need to carry out the purpose that God has called you to fulfill.
And God didn't give you a dream to break you.
Right.
It's not meant to destroy your marriage. And God will never give you a dream that will cause you to put your marriage on the altar.
Yes.
And for you to crucify your marriage. Now, hear me through the right context. Yes, God will cause you to lay both of your lives on the altar as a living sacrifice. But what I'm saying is He will never cause you to forfeit your marriage for the sake of a dream.
Yes.
That's rooted in your ego. That's rooted in somewhere else. And that's hard for people to swallow, especially if they feel like that they don't have a spouse that is as supportive. And it's also why we are preaching so hard to those who are single and dating as to why this process of dating God's way is so important, because you're going to deal with the repercussions of not asking these questions before you get married later on, when God gives you a dream and you feel like you don't have the support at home. Mm-hmm. And then that dream has to be modified ever so slightly, because God will never ask you to divorce your spouse for the sake of a quote unquote dream. I can tell you that. And as Victoria said, the more you go through this process, this unique one that you come up with your spouse, you're unique, come up with your strategy. How do you get a dream from the wild abstract stage into concrete physical form? And when you go through this phase multiple times, like Victoria and I have, it seems second nature. We know what it's gonna feel like at every phase until we deliver something. We do that with every single product that we develop in our business or the resources that we create for our ministries. We're putting this through a creative process and we're delivering. Again, we're not perfect in it, but we approach it. Let me give one example before we end about this process. Imagine building a house. Anybody who's built a house knows that you start on Pinterest or you start in magazines and you start imagining the kind of home that you would dream that you could live in, right? And then you start defining that by getting with an architect or going online and getting some blueprints and modifying those blueprints and saying, we need 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths, and we need an office for you. We need a studio for me. We need a this for that. We need all of these things. And then what is our budget? What can our budget afford? And then say, well, can we build within the structure of the home a space for what we'll need in the future, but yet not build it out because we don't yet have the resources. But we don't want to build a house we're going to outgrow in a couple of years, that doesn't have the capacity to stretch with us, right? Okay, so this is all the defining and the designing phase. And then you're developing. It means you hire contractors and you start laying the foundation and putting up the scaffolding and the walls and all of the intricate part. As you can tell, I'm not a builder, but I'm trying to describe it as best as possible. The thing about it is, if you start pouring the foundation and you've built the walls and you're putting up the drywall and you start going back to the dream phase because you weren't patient enough in the dream process, you're going to spend more time.
It's going to cost you.
It's going to cost you. You're also going to frustrate the heck out of your builders, your construction workers, and they're probably going to cut corners in some ways, or they're probably going to have to rework or rejig some things, which will cause maybe your foundation to be more faulty than it would have otherwise if you would have taken the time to settle in each phase and not rush through the process. I know you want to be in the delivery room right now. But as every mother knows, you've got 9 months of this baby developing in your womb, and you've got to be patient.
And then even when you have the baby, you have to go through a grueling process of nurturing and healing, and there's a lot that goes into it. So just because you have birthed the dream doesn't mean that's where God wants you to settle. It will continue to grow, it will continue to expand, and God will continue to refine your focus and refine your character.
And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you say, man, I'm a dreamer, but I hear what you're saying, and I don't have all of that structure in place. I don't have a doula or a midwife, someone there to help me, coach me through the process. We can help you at one of our Marriage with a Mission workshops. We give you all of the right questions to ask, because the key to communication is asking the right questions. So we help you ask the right questions and have those tough conversations, and help you understand each other's personality and develop a really strong vision for your future in your marriage. So go to moremostforever.com and find out when we're hosting our next Marriage with a Mission. We've got them going on all the time, and see what other events that you can attend as well with our ministry.
Yes.
And make sure that you support us financially. We are a nonprofit. We're counseling couples. We are hosting events, creating resources just like this. And we're working hard at it, and we need your support. All of that costs money. And then marketing it costs money. Putting ads on Facebook, which we do to reach more people and spread this message so that we can impact marriages that are broken and homes that are falling apart, and help them to put it back together with the love and the grace of God. Support us by going to moremostforever.com, hitting that donate button that pops up at the bottom. And if you could give monthly, that would be great. Any amount will do, $10, $25, $100, or more. It helps us fulfill our mission. We have a huge vision that we're in the creative process in. And so we need your support to make that happen.
Yes, and we're going to unravel that vision as the days go by. But we thank you for your support, and thank you for joining us for today's episode on Needed Conversations. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.